Hello everyone, my name is Pamela Rucker and welcome to all of you joining us from around the world for Harvard University's Professional and Executive Development Name Change Celebration. We all know that the role of executives is constantly evolving. To stay ahead in this ever-changing environment, professional and executive development programs have become increasingly important as a lever for corporate success. Now, many leaders join because they want to enhance their skills, get new knowledge, and gain insight. Then they find that by applying concepts when they're back at work, they feel more fulfilled in their career as well. Incorporating professional and executive development programs into your organization can give you all the tools and knowledge you need to navigate the challenges you see in a dynamic marketplace. Now, that means that it doesn't just benefit the leader personally, it contributes to the organization's overall growth and success. Today, we're going to be talking about the transition we're making from Harvard Professional Development Programs to Harvard Professional and Executive Development Programs. And joining me for that conversation are Laurie Pascal and David Shore. Laurie Pascal has over 35 years of industry experience, and she excels in leadership, team development, and strategic planning. She is a senior lecturer in health management at Harvard T.H. Chan School of Public Health, and she is also a consultant with international clients, including the National Health Services England, the New School for Leadership in Healthcare Taiwan, and Partners Healthcare. Previously, Laurie was the Vice President of Business Development and Planning and Vice President of Radiology at Beth Israel Deaconess Medical Center. David Shore was Associate Dean at Harvard T.H. Chan School of Public Health for 20 years. A founding member of McKinsey & Company's External Implementation Advisory Board, he specializes in operationalizing strategy for transformative change. He advised the George W. Bush Presidential Center and served as a senior consultant on innovation at the United Nations from 2019 to 2021. He is a former distinguished professor of innovation and change at Tianjin University of Finance and Economics in China, an adjunct professor of organizational development and change at the School of Business, University of Monterrey, Mexico, and an instructor at Harvard Extension School. Welcome, Laurie and David. I am looking forward to our conversation. We are excited about these latest changes because we think that they'll be able to help our growing audience of executive leaders stay ahead in this competitive business environment. And so I want to talk to both of you about why this is important and get your thoughts on why this is the right time to make this move. So let's start by looking at the changing marketplace. David, what do you think of the current pace of change in the marketplace, and how do you think that impacts the role of executives today?
Pamela, I'd say first we should interrogate reality. Many executives like to think that they're living the title of the 2023 Academy Award-winning movie, Everything, Everywhere, All at Once.
Yeah.
But the reality is that poly-change is not uniquely a 21st century phenomena.
Yeah.
In fact, Heraclitus, the 6th century Greek philosopher, was the one who first identified this issue, saying, and he is referred to as the philosopher of change, that the only constant is change.
Yeah.
And in fact, the data really supports that. Year after year, including 2023, 48% of human resource professionals say that managing change be one of their top priority. While hard skills are certainly essential, they're not sufficient. People are hard.
Yeah.
People are the unit of change. So today's moving from good to great really is about a 2024 blend of tea.
Yeah.
That is trust, empathy, and agility. And I would say finally that what the marketplace is looking for in leaders is we want people who can analyze problems like managers, but make decisions like empathic agents of change.
I love the fact that you started at the top of that with the fact that we're in this poly-change environment. I read a great article a while ago that talked about the fact that we need to all be polymath integrators, and that in addition to being in lots of environments of change, we need to know a lot about a lot of things so that we can apply our leadership skills to that change that we see. Laurie, I want to ask you the same question. How do you think the pace of change in the marketplace is impacting the role of executives today?
So I think two things, one of which is the ability to be thoughtful and quick.
Yeah.
in the same sentence, if you will,
Yeah.
is a very important consideration.
Yeah.
And that it's not just about executives' ability to think about change, it's really about bringing an organization of people together to not just tolerate, but to embrace the new opportunities, the new realities, and to both accept and be interested in and be challenged by and willing to go on this journey with executives. So, and to do it quickly, but not without patience. So it's this balance of skills that I think are so important as executives think about what's happening right now, and that we don't know where the next change is coming from or the next pressure is coming from. So being out, paying attention, so critical.
So in the one case, we don't know what's going to hit us from day to day, highly changed environment. But in the case you're talking about, there's this environment that we have speed and agility that's hitting us all the time. And one author says that we've been talking about that for the past 50 years and it's time to stop. It is just the way that we work, right? But I love the fact that you touched on what the leader should do when they're in an environment of constant change, constant speed, constant agility, and that is lead, right? And one of my favorite definitions of leadership is by James Clouzes. It's leadership is the art of motivating other people to want to struggle for your shared aspirations. And what you're talking about is this desire to want to struggle. I can't just have you tell me to do it. I have to want to work that way. Do you agree?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So David, we know that leadership imperatives have been changing quite a bit over the past few years as well. What types of leadership challenges do you see the typical executives facing today?
Well, I'll spotlight one based on my previous comments, and that would be change saturation. Goethe said, things that matter most should never be at the mercy of things that matter least. And we need to move from very long to-do lists and focus more on strategic imperatives and to-don't lists. One of the formulas that I use frequently in thinking about this is E squared equals 0, meaning if you highlight everything, you highlight nothing. So we need to limit the strategic imperatives.
Yeah.
We need to shorten the life cycle of these initiatives. And I would say, finally, we need to move, people need to move. You can't move them, but people need to move from their comfort zone to their discomfort zone. Now, there's nothing there that I've said in this final point that's new to anyone. The part that I think is intriguing is they need to move from their comfort zone to their discomfort zone without pushing them into their panic zone.
Yeah, I love that. I love the way you started with things that matter the most should not be at the mercy of things that matter the least. And I can't tell you the number of organizations I've worked with that have struggles with priorities. They have difficulty prioritizing the programs that they're working on. It's almost like saying that every single program is number one, everything is priority one. And when you operate that way, it's very difficult to have a very clear strategy that other people can follow. Do you agree?
I absolutely agree, and this is why we think there's far too many metrics, and I'm a huge fan of using super metrics, the metrics that matter most.
Mm-hmm. Laurie, I want to double click a bit on those last responses because it seems obvious to me that the evolution of strategy has actually impacted the responsibilities of executives within an organization. So how have you seen the demands of leadership evolving, and what leadership skills and capabilities should executives focus on in order to drive success when they're looking at these strategic shifts people are going through?
So that's a great question. I want to pick up on what David said, which is focus really matters. And I like to think about it as what is absolutely critical. If we don't get this done and done well and done with speed, we will never achieve what we need to do. That's the most critical.
Yeah.
That's the must-have.
Yeah.
Then there's the, okay, these things are important, and if we have time and capacity, we will get them. And then there's all the things that we typically do that won't contribute to the success of the organization. So being able to do that very quickly and repetitively and with focus, here's what we're actually going to spend time. Because I think the biggest challenge is we have workforces who are working hard and often burning out. And the burning out in part because they're doing so many things that aren't getting us where we need to be. So being able to do that balancing.
Yeah, so because I have things that are at mercy of those things that matter the most, those big important things that matter the most are at mercy of things that don't matter. I've got people who have difficulty prioritizing work, difficulty recognizing what they can let go of, and they're applying their best skills and burning themselves out every day.
And they're doing it for the best reasons.
Yeah.
So if we can't provide that kind of guidance, then it's unfair, unrealistic, and counterproductive to expect people to make those decisions in the best interests of the organization without that kind of leadership. And that's really what it is.
Yeah. David, let me ask you, what do you think about that? What needs do you see for senior leaders and executives that operate in a range of diverse industries and sectors to grow and to develop?
I think we see this in our programs. Our programs aren't designed to admire the problem, right? Leaders leave their footprint in the areas of their passion, and this requires walking in new snow where no one's walked before. And this is really the essence, that is what transformational change, or as I call it, quantum change, is all about. And when I listen to participants who have attended other programs elsewhere, they talk about the programs either focusing on thinking, strategy, or focusing on doing, both of which are incredibly important. But I always think about this as a Venn diagram where the lines never touch. And I think one of the things that are striking about our programs is we really look to have those lines touch. It's what we would call polarity management. It's not either or, it's and.
You're exactly right, because one of the things we enjoy most about the programs is we talk a little, we teach a little, and then we actually work a little. We take it away and we say, let's work on that. And what ends up happening is people have the ability to have learning in the moment. They think about the problems they have at work. They think about the challenges they have with the people they're working about. And while they're still here on campus, they can come back to the class and say, what would I do in this situation, right? So they're not just learning and thinking about it when they get home, but they've had a chance to practice it and to actually come back and get some help from a person who may help them. Do you agree? Yeah. I want to take a look at a slide that highlights the value of short, intensive programs. Researchers have found that leadership development can have a substantial positive impact on employers and employees in several areas. Personal growth, we see it impacting sense of self. We see it having greater meaning, greater purpose. We see it providing greater happiness, reduced stress, real transformation, and mental health and well-being. So in a recent study, we found that short, intensive programs had the same or even greater impact than equivalent 4-week programs did. Now, this is important because busy leaders don't have a lot of time. And with these programs, they can come to campus, get what they need, as we just said, and then use what they learn to create immediate change when they're back at work. Now, on top of that, research also tells us that these programs don't just transform how people lead, but they transform the way that they live. So participants have said things like, I was able to slow down and intentionally consider my purpose in life. I'm clearer and more focused about what I want to accomplish at work. Or they said things like, I was burned out and the program really gave me energy and it recharged my battery. So the researchers said that the best leadership programs lead to deep personal growth and that they boost the happiness and the meaning and the vitality that people experienced at work and in life. And to me, that's one of the biggest reasons that people in these programs can find that they can be so transformative. Do you agree with that, Laurie, David?
Yes, and in fact, the richness of the programs is not only are they getting the benefit of practitioners who love to teach, they're getting the benefit of other participants from different industries, different walks of life, different challenges, and discover that there are commonalities and interesting ways of problem solving that perhaps they hadn't considered, so that it's that interconnectedness that also brings the transformation and the growth.
Yeah, it's so interesting that you say that, because I can't tell you the number of times I've been in programs and talked to colleagues who've been in programs where the participants are surprised that people from all over the world have the very same problems that they do. There's this sense that it's me and it's what's happening in my world and it's only me, and when they find that it's exactly the same somewhere else across the universe, somehow it helps boost their confidence that, wait, there's something that is happening in every organization, everywhere.
and that different people are approaching it in some different ways that perhaps we hadn't thought about. May not be 100% successful, but it may be on a path that we hadn't considered before.
Yeah.
And what a wonderful conclusion or insight to reach, that people are people,
Yeah.
carbon and water. And the
Yeah.
other insight that I think they get, to your point and to Laurie's point, is that they begin to understand that the best professionals,
Yeah.
the best executives have one foot in the library and one foot in the street. That is where theory informs practice and practice informs theory.
I love that. The best executives have one foot in the library, right? And where's the other foot?
The other foot's in the street.
In the street. One foot in the library and one foot in the street. I think that's what helps people actually get to that transformative power in the programs, right?
And if I could add, in the programs we do this, learn a little, apply a little,
Yes.
come back and talk about it a little,
Yeah.
so that it's a constant growth process within
Yeah.
the room,
Yeah.
and that often we get feedback from not just the faculty but from colleagues who can provide a peer relationship that can be so energizing
Yes.
and thoughtful.
Yes, yes. Speaking of transformation, I want to talk a little bit about technological transformation and customer centricity. So, because so many organizations really focus on this idea of digital transformation, I see a lot of them looking for help with digital literacy and technology related skills. And one of the biggest misconceptions I've seen is that digital transformation is about technology. And we know from research that strategy, not technology, drives digital transformation. Researchers say it, the best consulting firms say it. And so we still need to get leaders to understand that. And it's easy for leaders to look at the latest technology and think, I really want that bright, shiny new thing, right? We've seen people do that. But the real opportunity, I think, comes from, number one, focusing on your customers or your constituents and the problems that they have. Number two, developing your own unique potential to solve those problems with digital solutions. And I say this to participants all the time. If you can identify the right customer or constituent and then develop the right strategy, then the technology probably exists to do what you want to do. And I believe this challenge goes directly to the heart of what every organization and every leader is trying to do. They're trying to find customers, they're trying to solve problems, they're trying to generate revenue. And everyone might play a different role in how this gets done, but the ultimate goal is the same. And the programs around strategy and innovation and business skills and leadership, all of that, those programs help people shift the way they think about value and where they think they can develop these customer-centric solutions. And so these are constant transitions that I believe leaders have to navigate. And David, I know that we're here today to celebrate the transition of Harvard Professional Development to Harvard Professional and Executive Development, and I know transitions are a focus of your work. Can you talk to us a bit about some of the points that executives might want to think about as they're going through their own transitions?
Yeah, thanks, Pamela. And here we really have to start with the data. There are high rates of dissatisfaction amongst executives with their executive transition. 90%, for example, 90% of CEOs regret how they handle their transition.
Wow. In
excess of greater than 90% say that they would manage it differently. That's not just CEO at the CEO level. The rate of occupational transitions increased by 50% between 2019 and 2022 compared to the last 3 years. And the data tells us that we're anticipating that between 2023 and 2030, it'll spike at even a faster rate. So with transitions, there's this cycle of enthusiasm followed by disappointment, right? We leave the strategy room singing Kumbaya and then nothing happens, right? And if we think about it, change by definition is a transition.
Yeah.
It's about going from to. We've left one place, but we haven't arrived in the other yet. We're nowhere between two somewheres. It's what we call liminal space or liminality. It's a time, on the one hand, of great risk, and on the other hand, of great opportunity. The dilemma when people navigate or struggle with the issue of transitions is often where they are is too good to leave, but too bad to stay, right? And so, in fact, in the Mastery Change program that I teach, we've developed a number of self-assessment instruments and worksheets. The purpose is to allow people to make go, no-go decisions relative to should they stay or should they go.
Yeah. There's so much that you said there. So let me go back to this idea that we are all in these environments of change. And I've read research that says even when it's good change, people struggle with it. And you said we're lost between these two somewheres, right? And so it's too great to leave and too bad to stay. And Laurie, I've heard you talk about the idea of a VUCA environment. One of the things that creates this challenge for them is the fact that they're in that environment. Can you talk about what VUCA is?
So I happen to like the acronym VUCA because I think it explains so much of our reality. VUCA, V for volatility, U for uncertain, C for complex, and A for ambiguous. And if we put all of those together, it's a little bit scary out there.
Yeah.
And since we don't know where we're going and we don't know how to get there,
Yeah.
then how do we start to bring some clarity and some stability into that? And I think, David, I loved your point about the point between somewhere and somewhere else, which is that during that phase, I thought about it as a sort of the never land of we're not quite sure, there is both uncertainty and a sense of loss, and that we have to deal with that emotional piece of what was good, bad, or indifferent. We knew it and we could predict it, and what will be, which we don't know, and we're losing often our capabilities or our competencies
Yes.
or our comfort level. We could
Yeah.
go on with all those C's
Yes.
before we get to that new beginning.
Yeah.
And so I think that's also part of this VUCA world, is we're living in the VUCA space.
Yeah. So here I am in this place that's great, right? Great place, but it's not good enough for where I want to go or who I know I need to be. But when I look out across the horizon, I've got this VUCA environment, and I don't necessarily want to step out. One of the colleagues I work with here, Julie Jungawala, talks about the idea of reinvention. And she and I had a conversation once, and she said to me, what people struggle with is the not knowing.
Right.
Right? If I let this thing go and I try to reinvent myself, I don't necessarily know what I'm going to become. I know what I'm dreaming about. And so this goes back to your being stuck between these two places, and I'm not sure what to do.
By definition, change takes place, to your point, in the theater of the unknown.
Yeah.
We don't know. By definition,
Yeah.
change is an experiment. We've not done it before.
Yes.
We don't know what we don't know,
Yeah.
and this is why
Yeah.
it's so scary. You know,
Yeah.
the Buddha said, I speak of one thing and one thing only, and he talked about what he called the suffering of change. And he said, all people suffer change for one reason and one reason only, and that is fear. Now,
Yeah.
that won't be anything new to people, but the other insight, to a point you made earlier, was for me illuminating. He said, people fear change, even when it's change for the good.
Even when it's
The
good.
fact that this is a positive thing, a desired thing, doesn't make it any less scary.
Yeah, I was talking to a colleague of mine recently, and we said, why is it that we always ask for these great, big, wonderful things, and then when we get them, we're afraid of these same great, big, wonderful things that we do? And I know, David, you did a great TED Talk on resistance to change. Why is it that even when it's good, even when it's something we really, really, really want, people struggle with this resistance to change, right? And can you talk a bit more about what you're seeing every day and why dealing with that specific phenomenon around resistance is so important?
Yeah. Let me say what a day without resistance is like. I'm just kidding. I have absolutely no idea. Because in our organizations and in organizations all over the world, there's a very high percentage of employees who are cave people, CAVE. That is, colleagues who are against virtually everything. You suggest a change and they tell you all the reasons why it's not a good idea here, right?
Yes.
I'm absolutely convinced that these cave people, the first three letters they ever wrote, the first three letters they ever spoke was A, B, C. Anything but change.
Yeah.
Right? And that's why when we do an RCA, a root cause analysis of why change initiatives fail so chronically and so spectacularly, we see that it's because people are not willing, people are not able, or people are not ready to change. And with all due respect, I think that it's managerial malpractice for executives, for professionals, not to have a change resistance management plan. In fact, the methodology that I've developed to counteract that ABC, anything but change, is also ABC, applied behavioral change, that is getting people ready, willing, and able to change. Because we should be very clear, it's impossible.
Yeah.
It's impossible to get someone to change when they believe their job security,
Absolutely.
their job satisfaction, and their
Absolutely.
livelihood depends on not changing. So it's a simple matter of physics, right? If you want to move something forward, you have to overcome resistance. If the resistance is greater than your force, there is no forward movement.
Yeah. And I think this is really important for leaders to understand, because we talk a lot about organizational alignment and us making sure that we're doing the right things for those customers and constituents that we talked about. But just as important, I think, is aspirational alignment. Does the employee want to go where we're trying to get them to go, right? And this is a key part of vision, right? Painting the future in such a way that people want to go there. This goes back to getting people to a place where they want to struggle for your shared aspirations. But if I come into work every day and I feel like you're trying to get me to move to a different place, then I'm going to be that cave person, right? A colleague that's against virtually everything. I'm going to steal that, right? I don't want to do anything. I talked to a person at a company once where I was doing a program, and he said that when people ask questions, we were in a large room having a large discussion. And a lot of times we're brought in to have discussions that are difficult for people to have internally, correct? And so one of the things he said was, when people say something to me that I don't necessarily agree with, I realize they're not really paying attention to what I think. So I'll just give them a nod and say, sure, I think that'll work. And I said, well, why do you do that? He said, that's called the company nod. And I said, what's the company nod? That's what you do when you know that your voice doesn't matter, when you know that they're going to change anyway. And then I leave and I go around the corner and I tell everyone all the reasons that it's not going to work. I tell them all the reasons it's going to fail. And then we all collectively drag our feet together. And this goes back to that resistance that you're talking about, David. Have you guys seen that at all?
Absolutely. I think there are a couple of things in that. One of which is, it's not enough to have the corporate vision. If it's not a shared vision that people can see and taste and touch and understand, it's very hard to go.
It's very hard.
Then it's, do we have the capability, the skills, the capacity, the training, the underpinnings that will enable people to do this process? And then do we, at the end, acknowledge, reward, support, and remove what was, so that people are now on the what is and what will be.
Absolutely.
And all of those are pieces of successful change, I think.
See, I find this so intriguing. I'm going to try to go to the board and talk about it really quickly. Because in his book, Leading Change, John Kotter from Harvard Business School talks about the value of lifelong learning for those that lead change in the 21st century. And he says your personal history leads to your competitive drive. It also creates a set of skills and abilities that you actually will end up working with. But if you do not take an attitude of lifelong learning, you will always be limited to working with just the knowledge that you know based on your path in life. And you'll miss the equally important opportunity to see what's happening out there in the rest of the world. And you won't know that there are proven frameworks that can actually help you succeed. So your personal experiences lead to your personal expectations. But there is way more out there than what you have seen and what you know individually. So having a commitment to lifelong learning can actually help you willingly seek out new challenges and put yourself in situations where you are forced to reflect honestly on why you have been successful and why you have failed. And the information that you receive in the programs you attend will really help you do that. Professional and executive development programs can help increase the outcomes in each one of these stages. It can help give you context for your personal history so you know how to tell your story. It can increase your competitive drive and your self-confidence so that you can know how you can talk about new material. It ramps up your knowledge and your leadership skills based on new frameworks that you'll receive, and it increases your competitive capacity by giving you all the information that you need while you're able to work in the environment that you're in every day. These are all accelerated, though, through your pursuit of lifelong learning. That type of learning helps you take on new challenges and take smart risks, where you use your best capabilities on the biggest priorities of the organization. And I think that's incredibly important Laurie and David, do you agree?
Makes perfect sense. And we think about lifelong learning, that somewhere along the line, we seem to think that we should know it all.
Yes.
That because we now have some expertise, we should be experts in all ways. And that mindset, in fact, is to our detriment.
Yeah.
Because the world is changing, technology is changing, the environment is changing, all of those things are true. And if we want to go into different positions or into different organizations, that humility of being not the expert becomes an even more critical aspect of our ability to be successful.
This is so important what you said, Laurie, because we're in this environment now where we have the psychology of self, and people do really think that I am the leader because I'm the best. I'm the biggest one, I'm the most important one, I have the most experience. And when you try to create minions, that's what you get, is those little minions, and we all know how they sound, right? And it's really important for you to have that humility that you spoke of, so that you recognize other people have things that they've brought to the table, but there are also loads of other frameworks out there that you can learn from. David, you were going to say?
Well, I would add to that. Empirically, what we did research that shows that when rising stars, emerging leaders leave organizations, they don't leave for money, they leave for continuing professional and executive development opportunities. Wow. That is, they just feel like they're in the hidden middle and they're going someplace that will stretch them, where they will grow. And so I think when we think about reducing churn or turnover amongst our rising stars, our emerging leaders, one thinks about keeping them, in part by offering them professional growth and executive development opportunities.
That's a great point, and a good segue into what I want to ask you about, which is around talent optimization, because in this case, it's about maintaining my talent pool, right? Keeping the people that I have on staff. Laurie, we know that there's a lot that we expect from executive leaders and a lot that they expect from their talent as well. How can executives use these professional and executive development programs to get more capability from their own talent pool?
So I think there's two pieces to that question, Pamela. One of which is, how can an executive use it to develop him or herself and be more effective? And part of that is learning new skills, exposing oneself, being in an environment of the learner, and growing that kind of capacity. And then I think of it as the trickle-down opportunity. So somebody participates in a leadership development, a professional development program of some sort, and that growth can then be applied to their teams or to other people that they work with, so that you get, if you will, more bang for your buck by that investment than simply sending one person. The other thing is it speeds up the process. So one can certainly grow and develop in place. Exposure to others, to other ways of thinking, other frameworks, other models, different kinds of opportunities to think differently and test out and fail quickly in different exercises perhaps, that also speeds up the learning process and the skill development process, so that we get that kind of, aha, I can take this back and use this. Personally, also with people that work around me, above me, below me, because we influence in all directions.
Yes, so there's the idea of the employee, the one who attends, plus the people who actually work with the person. They benefit from it. There's the education that they get. But I love what you said about this accelerated experience, right? Because when we put you in this think tank with other people and we say, now go off and test that, you come back instantly and you're able to ask questions, and other people are able to vibe off of what you said, and you have this experience in class or in program that you would have when you go back to work, and you have an opportunity to actually learn in an environment that's not necessarily as threatening as when you go back to the office. Would you say that's the case?
I think that's key. That is the psychological safety of being in an environment, a program where the expectation is that everybody is a learner and nobody is an expert. Makes it possible to have that kind of learning and growth that is very difficult when you are with people with whom you may be in competition, or they expect you to know the answer, and you don't always. But here, that's not the expectation. Here, the expectation is, let's figure it out together, and what might be better or less effective.
I love this slide we're going to bring up by Gallup, which I think addresses this a bit. Talent times investment equals strength. So talent, they say, is your natural way of thinking or feeling or behaving. Investment is the amount of time you spend practicing or developing your skills or building your knowledge base. And the outcome is strength, or the ability to consistently provide this near perfect performance. And every organization needs this. So research tells us that in order for your talent to become a strength, you must intentionally develop yourself and invest time into your skill and into your knowledge base. And professional and executive development programs increase what you know, and then because of that, they increase what you can do. And if you want to stand out, what you do and what you know has to be related to something the organization really cares about right now. And by staying on top of what's happening in the marketplace, you can see what's coming, and then you can create a plan to succeed, right? That's how knowledge helps you create new value. So this isn't just important for the leader, Laurie, as you said, it's important for your people too. So if you're a leader, one researcher says this: when you find people that are naturally gifted with the way that they think, hire them, right? Their talent comes naturally and you cannot teach that. But then after you hire them, invest in that talent, right? Train them so that they can get better at what they do as well. What do you think of that?
And the recognition that comes from being somebody who has been selected to grow and develop is an incredibly powerful statement. Far more powerful often than money, which is transient and everybody wants more. Anyway, so that's not it. It's I've been identified, there's an opportunity, people are willing to invest in me, I can see the growth here, which helps particularly generationally, as we see new generations coming up who may not have had some of those opportunities because of COVID, because of some things that have happened in the environment. This is a way of saying you're important, you're valuable, and we want you to be here and contribute.
Can I double click on that a bit? Because I know David brought up the fact that often people might leave an organization because they haven't been developed. And you just mentioned that there are times development can actually be more valuable than money. Can you talk about why that's the case? And I'll toss that to either one of you. Why do you think that development is that important to people?
I think one of them is it's a statement, if I'm the one being developed, it's a statement of value. It's a statement of belief and trust, and I can see a future. And I think that's the key. Money is good. I'm not arguing that money isn't useful. Money doesn't say those things. Money is a recognition of the past. Development is a recognition of the future.
I love that. I love that. Money is a recognition of the past, what you've done, the way you've worked, how you've burned the midnight oil. And we say this to people all the time. A lot of people burn the midnight oil hoping people will recognize, and they don't. But I love your thought about development is an investment in the future. It's what we see in you. It's what we think you're capable of. David, what about you?
Well, I would just add and go back to something you said earlier. Historically, we've hired for skill and trained for will. And I want to argue that to your first question about the current landscape, I think we are changing that around, at least in organizations that I work with, and I'm suggesting we hire for will now and train for skill. I could have the greatest of technical skill, but if my heart isn't in it, if I don't believe in what I call the MV squared, mission, values, and vision, do you really want me? Conversely, if I'm very excited about your mission and where you're going, but my skills need some improvement, that's really easy to provide. And so I think we're really flipping that paradigm.
I love the thought that we have these people who come into the programs who might be burnt out, tired. I've tried everything that I know. I've read everything I can get my hands on. And then they get in a room with colleagues around the world who might feel the same thing, and they're introduced to frameworks that someone has thought about, that they've put together, expressly designed for the problems that they're facing, and the relief that comes off of them. That then gives them the chance to do what some of the respondents said in the survey, which was think about what they want to do with their life, where they want to go, who they want to be, what they want to do. Have you seen people really, you almost see that weight coming off of them, or the excitement occurring in class when they see you talking about something that answers a critical question that they've been dealing with?
You know, one of the best parts of being able to instruct in this program is that I call it the aha moment. Or the eureka moment, where we're going along and all of a sudden says, I get it, I can integrate it, I can use it, and I see a different way forward. And to me, that's probably the single most exciting piece of what we do.
Isn't it a beautiful moment? And to watch the colleagues vibe off of each other with the challenges that they're having, or to go do the projects that they're working on. David, any thoughts from you?
Absolutely agree. And you'll note that, to your earlier point, Laurie said, that's the most exciting piece, not the paycheck.
Yes, yes, absolutely. So we have time for one more question before we go to some of our audience questions. Laurie, I do know you teach programs on vision.
I do.
In several of our programs, we know that the executives need the ability to lead with vision. Why do you think that's so important today? Because I think this is one of the biggest differentiating factors for success right now, particularly in a marketplace where everyone has access to the same information. When you look at what Gen AI is doing and how everyone can go and use a tool to find information, whether or not it's correct is another thing, but everyone has access to some level of information. Why is having a vision so important?
So I'm reminded of this wonderful quote from Alice in Wonderland, where the Cheshire Cat, I believe, says, if you don't know where you're going, any path will get you there. And I think that's true, except that it may not be where ultimately you want it to go. So unless we have, I think of it as the North Star, or one can pick one's own image of where are we heading. And even if we're not going to get exactly there, we have a mechanism by which we can steer. And I think that's important organizationally, that there's an organizational vision so we can bring people together in that critical aspect of alignment. It's also important personally, a personal vision for where individually we want to be, what's important to us, what are our values, what is our individual purpose, as well as the organization. And I think one of the things that comes out as we talk about vision, personal and organizational, is are those aligned? So is my vision purpose aligned, maybe not the same, but is it aligned with the organization's? And if not, if there's a misfit, what does that mean for me as an individual and as a member of this organization? And also, what does it mean for the organization if that alignment isn't in place?
You beat me to the question, because that was the main thing I was going to ask
Okay.
you. What happens when the organization has a vision, and the leader has a vision, and the person has a vision, and every single function has a vision, and they are out of alignment? You know, I talk to a lot of organizations where the branding is great. What they say on the outside is great to their customers. What they say to potential employees is great. But if you open up the kimono, you start to find out that, wait, we do not actually have the same vision. What we say about ourselves is not necessarily the way that we operate. It's not necessarily what we're going after. Do you see that quite a bit? And if so, what do you do when you see that?
So the image that comes to mind for me is the octopus, and there are those legs, and each one is going off in its own direction, and so the body stays still. And that's not what we're trying to do. So I would argue that vision is only as good as clarity, brevity, and does it reflect and enhance the organization's purpose. And if those things are true, we have a better shot, not 100% likelihood, but a better shot at how do we then translate that, because often it needs translation and endless communication, more so than we would ever imagine, into all of the parts of the organization, and then making the link. So there's I think it's an apocryphal story, it may be true, in the Space Center, where somebody asked the janitor what the job was, and he said, my job is to put a man on the moon. And like, okay, we have alignment there. We are all in support of the same purpose, not to clean the floor, to get a person on the moon. And so I think that's what we're aiming for, is that we all feel and connect with where we're going and why that's important.
I would imagine that takes us right back to the top of our conversation, though, because if we're in this poly-change environment and we have so much resistance to change, and then we have organizations that have had mergers and divestitures and they've changed strategy and so forth, you can actually have people that walk around with different glasses, different versions of who the organization is. I heard one researcher say that at any given time, if I have changed my vision, there's some employee or some group that's walking around with an old identity lingering out there somewhere, right? And so it creates these split personalities. And what you do is spend your time dealing with the impact of people not really seeing where it is that you want to go. Would you agree?
Yeah, and I think increasingly that's why instead of I don't talk about vision anymore. I talk about a shared vision. So if there and the real issue with vision for me is vision is a stretch goal, and the real conversation in departments and in the organizations is how far do you want to stretch? For some, they want to be best in their region, best in their category. Some want a moonshot. There are others that would say, you know what, in our industry, given our competitive set, a moonshot is inadequate. We want to do a Mars shot. So the question is, where do you benchmark the vision?
I love that. I have to tell you, both of you have clips that I'd want to take with me back and forth. We could keep going, but we do have some questions that have come in from our audience. So thank you to everyone that submitted questions for the program today. I want to take a look at a few of those right now. David, one viewer says, typically companies invest in growing individuals' skills and knowledge and competencies, but very few companies help build and sustain their capacity or their energy. Which is often taken for granted. And if you think about all of the things we've talked about today, you can see that that's the case. Why do you think that happens?
Yeah, it's a great question. And for me, the answer really comes in the form of how organizations talk about change. Organizations are obsessed about go live. When's the go live date? When are we going live? And with all due respect, while I certainly have an interest in go live, I'm far more interested in stay live. That is, how do you sustain the initiative over a protracted period of time? Who cares if you go live only to have that fail 6 weeks later? Well in excess of 70% of change initiatives revert back to the mean. We go back to the way it was. And the reason for that is when you introduce a change into an organization, a new thing into an organization, but you keep the same old policies and procedures and practices, it is predictable that we will revert back. I guess the good news is that change initiatives don't end poorly. They start poorly, and the end defines the beginning, right? And they start poorly because we don't plan for the transitions from strategy to implementation and to the viewer's comment, from implementation to sustainment. Who cares if you go live on time, on budget, to specifications, if you don't sustain that?
I have this model I talk about in programs where if you're going to be looking at initiatives that you should be leading for change, obviously you want to explore. I call it the 4E model. You explore the things that might be out there in the universe, and then you find out who you're going to be able to explain those things to. And then if you want to exploit them for strategy, you determine how you're going to put that into the mix of things you'll offer. But the last E is export. There has to be some work you give away. Do you agree? There has to be. And it's difficult for me to see people who are inundated with new initiative after new initiative after new initiative, and no one ever takes the old one away. And I tell people that, look, one man's trash is another man's treasure. What you give away, someone would love to have, right? If you've grown beyond a place, someone would love to have that. And so it's mostly vital that you work on things that only you can do and export that work to other people who can get that other work done. Do you agree?
In healthcare, we talk about that as working at the top of the license. So that's getting the most value of the people's skills, talents, expertise, and so on. And I think it's true across any industry. How do we get the best use? And that's more satisfying for people than doing things that aren't their best use.
Laurie, we have another one. Someone else asks, is an executive mindset for the chosen few, or is it for every employee in the organization?
What an interesting question. So I'm going to define executive mindset as thinking and acting like a leader. And if we do that, then I argue that it's for everybody. That leadership, unlike management, which you can see on an org chart, there are positions for management. Leadership is not a position on an org chart. Leadership is a way of being, it's a way of acting. It has inspiration and creativity and all the things that we need from our leaders. And if we then define it as the goal of leadership is to create more leaders, that's everybody's job. And so thinking clearly, communicating effectively, being a critical thinker, a problem solver, building trust with others, having a clear vision and goals within oneself and then with others, those are all leadership capabilities that organizations are richer and far more successful if everybody believes that they are part of the leadership team at whatever management level they are. It's the leadership issue that's more important.
And I think that happens when everyone has sort of breathed in that vision and made it part of themselves, right? Because it's really difficult for people to see themselves as a leader if they believe that that leadership ideal exists somewhere up in an ivory tower, right? That's not for me. I'm waiting for them to tell us what to do, to tell us what's important. But to your point, if everyone feels like they can be that, look at what we might be able to do as an organization.
And it gets to the previous comment about energy. Where does the energy come from? It believes that you have some capability of being important in this change or in this organization.
Yeah, I agree. David, we've had a question come in about global companies. A number of them came in, but here's one specifically. How are global organizations pivoting their existing talent strategies, short-term or long-term, to navigate all of these challenges that we're seeing as we're in this volatile geopolitical climate?
Another great question. So I would say that that the first responsibility of an executive is to assess the situation. Is the first thing anyone does.
Yeah.
We talk about as contextualizing, right? Where someone stands on an issue depends on where they sit. So when you go in to talk to different groups within an organization, it would be crazy in my mind to use the same talking points with the finance department that you use with engineering, and the same talking points with engineering with human resources and so on. Where people stand on an issue depends on where they sit. The job of an executive is to assess the situation, understand where people sit, to contextualize. So if we did an environmental scan of the current marketplace, we would have to have a compelling argument to say that we have to have shorter life cycles. For example, doing a strategic plan that was a 5-year plan, planning for the future 5 years out. 5 years ago, there would be absolutely no mention of this thing called COVID or the most recent wars. And so in my work and on this course we teach called Beyond Strategic Planning, we now, which is what we weren't doing a while ago, now say 3 years. No more than 3 years. How can you possibly predict? It's like meteorologists making a 10-day weather forecast, right? How could we predict? So 3 years.
And because of this VUCA environment we're in, too many variables might impact that to make it not true.
Exactly.
Speaking of which, Laurie, some people have indicated that they're still having leadership challenges that have come from the pandemic. And so how do you think COVID-19 has changed the way that we lead within an organization?
So COVID is a really interesting phenomenon because it was worldwide. And because we saw different responses, so there are perhaps some different ways of looking at it. COVID was a horrible thing, and the one benefit, I think, to COVID is it taught us as leaders that we could make change happen quickly, that we could address problems in an instant, and that we could think differently, and that we could move our organizations in an instant. And that to me is a wonderful lesson in leadership, which is freeing in a sense, that all the things we said couldn't be done, well, they could be done. And so how do we hold on to that? To me, that's one of the challenges of leadership in this quasi post-COVID world, is how do we hold on to that? I think the second piece in leadership is that COVID forced us to think about the unthinkable. And there's more of that coming, whether it's geopolitical or economic, or pick your category. There's more of that wouldn't have considered it, have to consider it. So the leadership skill is getting comfortable with being uncomfortable and thinking the unthinkable. And both of those things contribute to things like fast adaptation. Okay? Resilience, of course. Telling the truth. Not that we're saying people lied, but being clearer about what we know, what we don't, and what are we going to share when we know it, that transparency, truth connection. I think the other piece is COVID has required us in a good way to focus on our workforce in ways that perhaps we weren't as attentive in the past. What do people need? What do they want? What are their lives like outside of work, and how does that contribute to their ability to bring themselves, their full selves, into work? And what kinds of ways do we have to adapt to and support people in that? I think also is, how do we measure productivity? It was really clear in the old days. People came to work, therefore they were productive, more or less.
So we said, right?
So we said. And it turns out, of course, that's not true. So how do we operate in a world that's not going back to everybody goes in the office every day? What does this hybrid world look like? And how do we make it work for the individual and for the organization effectively?
It's interesting that you said that, because when you think about people not wanting to change, I remember there was a quick survey that came out after the pandemic that said, which C actually created the most change in your organization? Was it the CEO, the CIO, the CFO, or COVID? And COVID won. Right? There were loads of things that we said we could not do. prior to COVID, but in reality, not a forced sense of urgency, David, but the true urgency around the fact that if I don't get this right, we will not be in business. It's amazing how we were all able to come together and solve these really thorny problems that we thought we could not solve before, number one. But I love the point that you made about something that the Harvard Bloomberg Initiative says: the unthinkable has happened and it will happen again. To your point, 3, 4, 5 years ago, we would not have talked about COVID. We would not talk about the wars we're dealing with. And so it's really important for people to stay abreast of what's happening and to think about, how do I deal with these crises, and how do I deal with the strategies that I need to deal with every day, and how do I address this for my customers, my constituents, and everyone else?
Well, you know, before we said the best professionals have one from the library and one from the street, I think to Laurie's point and to yours, I think what we're saying now is that the best professionals and organizations need to, on the one hand, be up on the balcony looking at a distance,
Yes.
while on the other, on the dance floor.
Yeah.
That is a telescope. It's not adequate just to have a telescope, nor is it adequate just to have a microscope.
Yeah.
Back to our polarity management. It's
Yeah.
not an either or. We
Yeah.
need to be both on the balcony
Yeah.
and on the dance floor.
Yeah. Well, Laurie and David, this has been incredible. We are out of time, but as you can see, we are not out of conversation. We could go on for a while. Thank you both for sharing your thoughts with us today. Hearing your insight reminds me of one of the biggest things that I love about teaching professional and executive development, and it is the amount of impact that this work has on a person's career. And so this leads me to one final comment and one final slide I want to share, and I think we'll close with that today. In a recent program we led here, we found that over 90% of participants reported that they either received a promotion, a raise, or a new job based directly on lessons they learned from the program. Now that is an incredible statistic, and one that we're really proud of. So we hope that something that we've said today helps you see professional development and executive development programs as a way to invest in yourself and as a way to invest in your team. Laurie, David, and I have some programs coming up in the near future that you might be interested in. I'll be teaching executive leadership, skills experienced leaders need to succeed, leading your organization's digital transformation, strengthening business relationships, creating strategic alliances and building trust, and then women leaders advancing together. David will be teaching strategies for leading successful change initiatives, a mastery session, and beyond strategic planning, from implementation to sustainment. And Laurie will be teaching executive leadership, skills experienced leaders need to succeed, and women leaders advancing together. Thank you so much for joining us today. I am excited about our new name and all of our offerings. I believe they will open the door to new opportunities for leaders, give them new people to work with, and help them move ahead in their journey. We are looking forward to meeting all of you online or here on campus in Cambridge. See you soon.